On March 30th, 2017, the Utah Court of Appeals issued its decision in the case of In Re B.J.V. Here's the link to the court's entire decision, and we also include that link in the description section of this video report. The father, L.K., appealed the juvenile court's order terminating his parental rights. The Court of Appeals affirmed the decision of the juvenile court. The father argued that there was insufficient evidence to demonstrate grounds supporting termination of his parental rights. The juvenile court based its termination decision on several grounds, including unfitness. The evidence in the record supported the juvenile court's findings and determination that father was unfit to care for his children. The finding of any single ground for termination is sufficient to warrant termination of parental rights. As a result, if there is sufficient evidence to support any of the grounds for termination found by the juvenile court, the termination of the father's rights is appropriate. For example, the juvenile court found that the father had an extensive history of both drug use and domestic violence. It was clear that father's drug habits were not resolved by the completion of the initial drug rehabilitation program. Similarly, the juvenile court found that the father had not adequately addressed his domestic violence issues. Father's failure to adequately address his domestic violence issues is all the more important due to his ongoing relationship with the mother of the children, who had previously relinquished her parental rights to the children. Accordingly, due to the father's failure to address several internal issues and to put the children's interest ahead of the interest of the mother, the juvenile court found that the children would not be safe if it returned the children to the father's custody. The juvenile court entered an order determining that the Division of Child and Family Services, or DCFS, made reasonable efforts to reunify the child with the father, but the evidence in the record supported the juvenile court's determination that DCFS provided reasonable services to the father. Finally, father alleges that the juvenile court erred in denying the mother's attempt to invoke spousal privilege to prevent her from testifying at the trial. Father alleges that the juvenile court improperly allowed a blanket application of an exception to spousal privilege that applies, quote, if the interest of a minor child of either spouse may be adversely affected. The court may refuse to allow invocation of that privilege, close quote. This argument, however, was not adequately preserved. Prior to her testimony, the mother raised the argument of spousal privilege, not the father. The court eventually decided that the privilege did not apply. The mother was then questioned by all parties. Father never objected to any part of her testimony in regard to privilege. If father believed that certain testimony should not have been included within the scope of the juvenile court's previous ruling, it was incumbent upon him to object to that testimony and provide the court with reasoned arguments as to why that particular testimony should have been privileged. Contrary to father's argument, it was not the responsibility of the juvenile court to explore every potential line of questioning prior to issuing its initial ruling. Accordingly, because the issue was not adequately preserved, the Court of Appeals declined to address it.